What's up, Dragon Brood? Today, we're going to talk about a subject that brings with it a lot of trepidation, something that creates a bunch of nervousness, something that just makes people even a little bit fearful. And what we're going to talk about today is when should you care about the standard rotation? And what it means to you, really, because I think it really matters depending on how you engage with the game of Magic, and also whether you're playing in paper, whether you're playing on Arena, maybe even if you're playing Commander. It's going to mean something different to every player. And it's a thing that happens every year, so you kind of have to keep it on your radar, but I would argue you don't need to be overly concerned about it. But it's going to be up to you, and everybody's going to treat it differently. But I at least want to give you some facts, some thoughts, and let you make a decision for yourself, what it means to you, and how you should be preparing for it. Some people ask, I've heard about this rotation, but what does it actually mean? Well, every year, come sometime between September and October, usually depends on when the set releases during that time, everything's going to rotate. What that means is the oldest 4 sets in Standard are going to fall out, and then you're just going to have the newest 5 sets. And that's going to be your standard format. Each set that comes out for the next year gets added to it, then you get all the way back up to 8 set Standard effectively, and then we go back down to 5 and we do the whole thing all over again. And that's how we do it every single year. Now, why do they do that? Well, this is just to keep Standard fresh. So you always are playing with the latest cards. It's easier for people to engage with, and they don't have to go chase down a bunch of old cards to participate in Magic. It's often the most popular format with newer players because you can just grab something off the shelf, build a deck out of just whatever the latest theme or something is, and still be able to play in most events. Whenever you go to a Grand Prix or even a local F&M or whatever, you can find Standard players to play with. So it's easily the most popular of the constructed formats that are at least, I guess, organized. I would say the most popular construction format at this point is likely Commander. Now, taking it a step further, how do you prepare for this rotation when it happens every year? Isn't that just like a waste of resources? Well, not really. But it really depends on how you choose to engage with the game. Now let's talk about Arena, for example. Arena can be a little bit difficult because people already have hard time managing their resources, right? You may not have enough wildcards to build the decks you want, or maybe you don't have enough gold or gems or whatever have you, which I'm working on a different video for that to help you out, by the way. But when do you decide to use your resources? That's one of the things we see a lot when it comes to Arena, is people saying, well, I didn't want to build that deck because I didn't want to use all my wildcards. And it's like, well, it's January. Why do you care about a thing that's happening in October? You know, like, that's such a long window of time. For me personally, I would say if you're in Arena, sometime around just before the last set comes out. So in the summer, sometime around late June, early July, kind of start figuring out what you want to do going into the fall. I would probably not build any more decks that require anything beyond the most recent 4 sets, because you'll have those plus that September-October set that fits that new standard, and then whatever you build or put together will still be legal for that. Now, if you need to have a handful of cards from older sets, sure, go for it. Maybe you're playing with old cards that you already opened or something like that, great, no problem. But try to focus on decks that are largely of the new sets. Like, it's very possible you could build something with Magecraft, for instance, and most of those cards are going to come out of Strixhaven. Or at least you can play spells that are commons and uncommons from older sets, so you're not having to blow up a bunch of resources to make the deck work. Something like that would be a perfect example. To a lesser extent, something like Rogues, possibly, because that uses a lot of cards from Zendikar, you know, maybe there. But even then, you're going to have some cards from, say, like Core Set 2021, like the Thieves Guild Enforcer, that is going to rotate. So you kind of have to decide on where you want to spend your rares or not. But if you only have to spend a couple to finish out a deck, then it seems reasonable to go ahead and build it. I just wouldn't invest in anything that uses a lot of rares and mythics that are older than those 4 sets, because that would be likely going to waste if you're choosing to continue to play Standard. Now, if you're okay letting that deck move to Historic, then go ahead and play it, buy your cards, you'll be fine. But if Standard is your concern, then don't burn those cards older than that. And then as you get into that last set releasing, I would just focus strictly going forward. Like ignore everything from behind because you're going to be inside of that 3 month window where you're going to lose a lot of those cards or those resources in this example. Now, if you're playing in paper, it becomes a much different, more complex kind of argument, right? Because in paper, you have the ability to trade cards in to vendors. But even that has kind of a window of time. You're probably going to want to start trading things in that you don't plan to use for the next 4 or 5 months, probably sometime when you're about 5 months out. After that, you're going to start seeing buy lists kind of what I like to call seize up a little bit on stuff that's going to rotate from standard because they know they're going to sell less of it. They're going to want to acquire less of it. So you probably need to start selling about 5 months out before the buy lists start coming down on price or even just taking cards off their buy list entirely. The other thing is you do have the ability to spend store credit, and then you do have the long-term value of the physical cards still being able to do something. Now, I will say, this becomes a little bit different because now, if you're going to acquire cards, it's not really so much about spending your resources, it's just about future potential value. If the card's still being used in Modern or Legacy or Commander or whatever, then feel free to go ahead and pick it up because you're not likely to lose more than half your value in a lot of cases because people are still going to want it. I'd even argue that a lot of times, if the cards are used in older formats, even when you get about a year to a year and a half beyond standard, you start seeing the trajectory of the price start going back up because there's less in rotation, people aren't opening them, they're not drafts happening with that set anymore. So as the supply starts to become less with new players coming in and old players going out, the price starts to go back up. An example of this card for me was Vanquisher's Manager, back when Ixalan was, I believe. And that was a card that during standard nobody really played with. But I realized early on, like, this is a card that's very popular in Commander. So I went ahead and scooped up a bunch. And I was able to get them for just a couple of dollars. Now they're for $10 plus, and they always trade and sell well. So I had no problem picking those up even throughout the end of the standard rotation for them because I knew they were going to have long-term value. So something like that, where if you want a card and you're going to play with it and you know it's not popular for standard, but it's something you want, go ahead and pick it up. If it's used or valued in other formats, you'll probably be okay. Now, if there's something you want to build a deck and it's not popular or used in older formats, that's probably not a thing you want to do because you're just going to get caught with something that you're paying a high value on that the price is just going to be bottoming out within the next 3 months anyway. Now, it can also be fun if you see the price on cards coming down and there's something you've been waiting to build and you have the resources or the store credit or whatever to build it, then go ahead and do so. There's nothing stopping you. I say go for it and have a good time with it. Now, what does it mean if you're a Commander player for the rotation? Now, obviously, standard rotation you think means nothing to a Commander player. It's kind of like, well, I play Commander. Why do I give a damn that cards are rotating from standard? Well, that could be your time to pick up stuff. Because again, when we get inside of that, we'll call it 4 month window, and prices start to come down as people don't want to necessarily pay for or buy as much on cards that are rotating out of standard, you kind of have from there to about 4 months post rotation that if anything comes out that's been too expensive for you, well, that's going to be the best window you're going to see is where they're going to be at their lowest prices possible. So that's the time you want to start picking up stuff for your Commander decks. Anything before that, you might still be paying a premium. Anything after that, the prices kind of start to go back up if they remain to be popular in Commander. So again, you have about we'll call it in 5 to 8 month window where you're going to get the best possible price. So you kind of want to start looking at rotation about the time to pick up stuff. A lot of stuff that falls into these categories are things like popular artifacts that aren't necessarily huge in other formats. Good examples here are going to be something like Embercleave or the Great Hinge. Things that are really popular in standard and even very, very good, but don't necessarily have value outside of standard. But they still matter to the Commander crowd to some extent or another. And when you get to rotation, you're going to have that dip where that's going to be your lowest price. You're in that window of time to pick it up and kind of add to your collection of Commander stuff to have for later before the price starts to go back up. The dual lands of different varieties or fetch lands or whatever, whenever they rotate out. Like in this case, you might be able to get something along the lines of some of the triomes or something when a rotation happens. That outside of standard, nobody necessarily wants those, but they do still carry value in Commander. Partly because they produce 3 colors, but also because they count as the different basic land types whenever you're trying to search for stuff. So different factors there could make cards valuable outside of standard, and that's the time you should target them as well. Now, another conversation I want to have related to this is people just hoarding their wild cards in Arena, right? At some point, you either have to decide if you're going to actually play Standard or you're not. Like at some point, you can't just be afraid to use your wild cards forever. If you see a deck that looks fun and you really want to play it, then make it a goal or a target to acquire maybe half of the rares or wild cards you need to build it, and then spend the other half. So you're not blowing up your cache of wild cards, but you can still go ahead and play the deck you want, and you're at least rewarding yourself for putting in that time and effort to get the cards or get the wild cards to produce what you wanted. Also, there's kind of a lost opportunity, right? If you're never spending the stuff to play the deck you want, then you're missing the opportunity to play all the events online, the tournaments that happen, any of the special promotional stuff, and even just play fun ladder games or engage with the content, or even build something that one of your favorite content creators is showing off. Like, you're depriving yourself of a lot of fun. I mean, sure, there's a little bit of concern of resources, but there's also an opportunity loss. And then you kind of have to question, like, how much fun are you having with the game if you're just riding around with paranoia and never spending any of the resources? And it is a fine line. It does take some balance. But I think if you reach out or ask around, there's always somebody that's going to help you to try to figure that out for yourself. But overall, I hope this helps people out. I hope we get fewer people sitting around in, January or even like right after rotation concerned about spending cards about the following rotation. I mean, if you get something and you get to play with it for 6 months to a year, that's plenty value for spending those wild cards, and you have forever to build up more. So don't really concern yourself too much with it. I think you'll be fine. But like I said, just watch about that window when you get close to the rotation, and then just don't pick up old cards. I think that's the best advice I could give anybody. But hopefully this helps you out. Remember, if you haven't, please like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and check out some of my other content, as I've been putting up Magic content every single day to give you something to, I don't know, let's call it enrich your Magic life and have some fun. But that's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.